First Contact and Miscalculation. Supreme Commander Valkyr of the Galactic Confederation stood on the command deck of the Eternal Glory, the flagship of the 53rd Expansion Fleet. His four eyes studied the holographic display showing a newly charted sector of space. The scout reports had confirmed what the long-range sensors suggested. A technologically emerging species had established colonies beyond their home system. Humans. Valkyr pronounced the word carefully, testing how it felt in his speaking apparatus. How many worlds have they claimed? Fleet analyst Zuri consulted her neural interface. 17 colonized worlds. Supreme Commander. 8 fully terraformed habitats and 9 mining outposts. Their expansion rate is unprecedented for a species only 4 centuries into space travel. Valkyr's facial ridges furrowed. And their military capabilities. Limited by our standards, Zuri replied. They appear to prioritize civilian infrastructure and resource extraction. Their vessels are primarily adapted cargo haulers with rudimentary defensive systems. They rely heavily on fixed defensive platforms around their key worlds, rather than maintaining a substantial mobile fleet. Commander Valkyr manipulated the holographic display, focusing on the human home system, Earth. Their entire civilization developed on a high-gravity nitrogen-oxygen world. No wonder they're physically robust. Science Officer Nexus added, "Our xenobiologists suggest this may explain their rapid technological advancement. Species from challenging environments often develop accelerated problem-solving capabilities." Valkyr clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Or perhaps they simply haven't encountered sufficient challenges among the stars. The void has ways of tempering unchecked ambition. The bridge fell silent as the crew recognized the familiar precursor to a command decision. The Confederation had encountered 32 spacefaring species in its 15,000-year history. All had eventually joined the collective, some through diplomatic integration, others through necessary subjugation. "Send the standard diplomatic package," Valkyr finally ordered. "Inform them of Confederation border protocols, resource allocation quotas, expansion restrictions, and administrative requirements. Give them 2 standard cycles to respond." "As you command, Supreme Commander," Communications Officer Trelix acknowledged, transmitting the orders to the communications array. The diplomatic package was transmitted on all frequencies humanity was known to use. It contained the accumulated wisdom of the Confederation, 15 millennia of interstellar governance distilled into clear directives for an emerging species. The message established the Confederation's territorial claims, outlined the application process for expansion permits, detailed the resource taxation system, and specified the timeline for administrative integration. One standard cycle passed, then another. No response came from human space. Impudence or incompetence, Valkyr mused during the command staff meeting as the second cycle drew to a close. Either way, we cannot allow unregulated expansion to continue. Strategic Advisor Malari, the eldest member of the command staff, ventured a rare opinion. "Supreme Commander, our xenopsychologists suggest humans may interpret our communication differently than intended. Their historical records show a species fiercely protective of their autonomy. All species value autonomy." Advisor, Valkyr dismissed the concern with a gesture. "Until they understand the benefits of proper governance. Prepare a demonstration force. We'll establish presence at their outermost colony and open direct negotiations." 3 Confederation battlecruisers arrived at the human mining outpost designated HD 32,571 IV. The settlement was modest, environmental domes covering extraction equipment, habitation units, and a small spaceport. The Confederation vessels took position in high orbit, broadcasting their presence on all channels. The humans responded almost immediately, not with diplomatic transmissions, but with 5 vessels rising from the planet's surface. Primitive craft by Confederation standards, barely a third the size of the battlecruisers. "They're powering up energy systems," reported the sensor officer aboard the lead cruiser, Immutable Law. "A defensive posture only," Captain Jevar noted. as expected from a species encountering superior force for the first time. Maintain position and continue broadcasting diplomatic credentials. What happened next would be debated in Confederation strategic circles for years to come. One of the human vessels abruptly accelerated, bringing it dangerously close to the immutable law's sensor array. Whether it was a deliberate act of aggression or a navigational miscalculation remained unclear. The Confederation vessel's automated defense systems, interpreting the approach as an attack vector, fired a warning burst from its forward particle cannons. The human ship erupted in a brilliant flash as its reactor core breached. The remaining human vessels immediately opened fire with primitive but surprisingly effective kinetic weapons. Tungsten rods accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. "Return fire, all batteries," Captain Javar ordered, his voice steady despite the unexpected escalation. "Neutralize the threat." The exchange lasted less than 8 minutes. When it ended, the 5 human vessels were reduced to debris, and the Confederation cruisers had sustained moderate damage to their outer hull plating. The first time in over 900 years that Confederation vessels had been damaged in a first contact scenario. On the Eternal Glory, Supreme Commander Valkyr received the report with cold fury. "So they choose conflict over cooperation. A regrettable but not unexpected outcome for a species that developed in isolation." The decision was made unanimously by the command staff. The Confederation would execute a limited punitive action against key human outposts, demonstrating overwhelming force while minimizing civilian casualties. After sufficient demonstration of technological superiority, the humans would be offered terms of surrender and integration. Over the next 20 days, Confederation forces struck 6 human colonies with surgical precision. Defense platforms were vaporized by concentrated particle beam fire. Military installations were identified and neutralized from orbit. Resource processing centers were disabled but not destroyed. They would eventually serve the Confederation after all. Human resistance was disorganized and ineffective. Their ships, while numerous, were outclassed in every engagement. Their weapons, while occasionally innovative, could not penetrate Confederation shields. Their tactics, while persistent, failed to adapt quickly enough to the overwhelming technological gap. Then, strangely, the humans began to retreat, not in disarray, but in what appeared to be a coordinated withdrawal. Colony after colony evacuated its military assets, pulling back toward their inner systems. They recognized the futility of resistance, Captain Javar observed with satisfaction as the fleet regrouped after the successful neutralization of another human outpost. Strategic Advisor Mallory was less certain. "In my experience, Supreme Commander, prey doesn't typically run unless it has somewhere to go." Valkyr dismissed the concern. "There is nowhere to go, Advisor. The Confederation fleet stands ready to push forward to their homeworld if necessary. Prepare for the next phase of operations." As the Confederation fleet prepared to advance deeper into human territory, long-range sensors detected unusual activity around Earth's orbit. Massive energy signatures unlike anything previously observed from human technology. "What are we seeing?" Valkyr demanded, studying the strange readings with growing concern. Science Officer Nexus analyzed the data, his expression grave. "It appears, Supreme Commander, that we may have miscalculated." The unexpected response. The massive hangar doors of the Jovian orbital shipyard slowly parted, revealing the silhouette of humanity's best-kept secret. General Helena Rodriguez stood on the observation deck, watching as the UES Retribution moved into position, its colossal frame dwarfing the escort vessels surrounding it. "How many years?" asked Admiral Chen beside her, his voice quiet with awe. 23, Rodriguez replied. 23 years since we detected the first alien signals and realized we weren't alone. 23 years of preparing for this moment while pretending to be weaker than we are. The Retribution was the first of Earth's Dreadnought-class vessels, a warship unlike anything humanity had publicly displayed. At 3 kilometers in length, its hull was composed of layered metamaterials that absorbed or redirected energy. 6 massive magnetic accelerator cannons ran the length of the vessel, capable of launching projectiles at relativistic speeds. Point defense systems, missile batteries, and energy projectors dotted its surface. And it wasn't alone. 5 sister ships moved into formation around it. Defiance, Sovereignty, Vindication, Judgment, and Reckoning. Operation Thunderbolt is now active, Rodriguez announced to the command staff gathered on the observation deck. All colonial forces have successfully executed their strategic withdrawal. The Confederation believes they're pursuing a broken enemy. Strategic Director Kaplan pulled up a holographic display showing the Confederation fleet positions. They've divided their forces, just as we predicted. Their arrogance made them overconfident. They never bothered to conduct deep scans of our inner system, because they never considered us a threat. Admiral Chen remarked bitterly. Just another primitive species to be subjugated. Rodriguez's expression hardened. That perception ends today. For decades, humanity had maintained 2 distinct space programs. The public face was their colonial expansion effort, civilian-focused, utilitarian vessels engaged in mining and terraforming, with modest defensive capabilities that posed no threat to a superior power. This was the human presence that the Confederation had observed, analyzed, and dismissed. The second program, hidden in the shadows of gas giants and asteroid fields, was Project Dreadnought, a massive military buildup based on theoretical technologies human scientists had been developing since the first detection of alien signals. These ships had never left the confines of the inner solar system, remaining perpetually in stealth configuration during their testing and evaluation phases. All ship commanders, this is General Rodriguez. You all know what's at stake. For centuries, humanity dreamed of making contact with alien civilizations. We imagined peaceful exchange of knowledge and mutual respect. Instead, we found an empire that demands subjugation. They believe themselves our superiors in every way. Today, we prove them wrong. The 6 dreadnoughts and their escort fleets moved out from Earth orbit, utilizing a propulsion system that created minimal subspace distortion, another technology the Confederation didn't know humans possessed. The first engagement occurred near the former human colony of Proxima Centauri Ia. 3 Confederation cruisers were conducting final sweep operations when the UES Defiance dropped out of FTL travel directly above them. Captain Jovar of the Immutable Law barely had time to order shields raised before the first salvo struck. The relativistic projectiles from the Dreadnought's magnetic accelerator cannons delivered kinetic energy that overwhelmed the Confederation's shielding algorithms, systems designed to disperse energy-based attacks, not massive physical impacts. Impossible, Javar gasped as status panels flashed emergency warnings across his bridge. They had nothing like this in their arsenal. The Immutable Law managed to fire one desperate salvo before a second barrage of projectiles shattered its spinal structure. The other 2 cruisers fared no better, overwhelmed by the unexpected firepower of a vessel class they had never encountered before. News of the defeat reached Supreme Commander Valksur aboard the Eternal Glory as he was preparing for the final push toward Earth. Deception, he snarled, his facial ridges flaring with rage. They deliberately missiled us about their military capabilities. Strategic Advisor Malari studied the sensor readings from the destroyed vessels. These aren't hastily constructed ships, Supreme Commander. The design's sophistication suggests long-term development. They were preparing for interstellar conflict long before we arrived. But why? Valksur demanded. We offered them the opportunity to join the Confederation, to benefit from our guidance and protection. Perhaps, Malari suggested carefully, what we perceive as guidance, they perceive as subjugation. Before Valksur could respond, the tactical officer called out, multiple contacts emerging from FTL. Unknown configuration, massive energy signatures. The holographic display showed 6 enormous vessels appearing at strategic points throughout the system, effectively surrounding the Confederation fleet. For the first time in his long career, Valksur felt a tremor of uncertainty. He had commanded the subjugation of 4 species for the Confederation, and none had presented anything close to this level of resistance. "All vessels, battle formation," he ordered. "Concentrate fire on the largest unknown vessel. Let's see if their defenses match their offensive capabilities." The Confederation fleet, still a formidable force with 15 capital ships and numerous support vessels, oriented toward the approaching UES Retribution. Particle beams, plasma torpedoes, and gravitic distortion weapons, the pinnacle of Confederation military technology, converged on the human dreadnought. The Retribution didn't attempt to evade. Its metamaterial hull absorbed some attacks, while reactive shielding deflected others. The vessel emerged from the barrage scorched but functional, and then it returned fire. All 6 of its main cannons discharged simultaneously, each targeting a different Confederation vessel. The impacts were devastating. The kinetic energy transferred through shields designed to stop energy weapons, not physical projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. "They've adapted their weapons specifically to counter our defenses," Science Officer Nexus realized with growing horror. "This isn't random innovation. They've been studying us, planning for this confrontation." Around the system, the other 5 dreadnoughts engaged Confederation forces with similar effectiveness. The massive ships were complemented by swarms of smaller, highly maneuverable craft that emerged from their hangar base, specialized interceptors targeting Confederation engines and weapons emplacements with surgical precision. Within hours, the battle had turned into a rout. The Confederation's technological advantage, maintained for millennia against dozens of species, had been neutralized by human ingenuity and preparation. "Retreat," Valkyr finally ordered, his voice tight with restrained fury. "All vessels, emergency FTL to rallying point Omega. We need to regroup and reassess." As the surviving Confederation vessels fled the system, General Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. "Signal all dreadnoughts," she ordered. "Pursuit Protocol Nemesis is now in effect. Don't let them escape to warn the rest of the Confederation." Turning the tide, Supreme Commander Valkyr never made it to rallying point Omega. The Eternal Glory was intercepted mid-flight by the UES Sovereignty, which had predicted the Confederation's retreat vector. The human dreadnought appeared directly in their path, its weapon systems already charged and targeting solutions locked. "Emergency maneuvers," Valkyr ordered, but it was too late. The first salvo disabled their engines, while the second targeted their communications array. "They're not trying to destroy us," Strategic Advisor Mallory observed with surprise. "They want us intact." A transmission cut through the chaos on the bridge. "Confederation vessel, this is Captain Diana Wells of the United Earth Ship Sovereignty. Your vessel has been disabled. Power down your remaining systems and prepare to be boarded." For the first time in the Confederation's 15,000-year history, a Supreme Commander faced the prospect of surrender to a supposedly inferior species. Valkyr's mandibles clicked in distress. "Perhaps, Supreme Commander," Mallory suggested quietly, "it is time to consider diplomatic options." Throughout human space, similar scenes played out as the dreadnought fleet systematically disabled and captured Confederation vessels. It was not a war of annihilation, but a precise military operation designed to neutralize the threat while preserving valuable intelligence and technology. 3 days after the initial counterattack, Supreme Commander Valkyr was escorted into a conference room aboard the UES Retribution. General Rodriguez sat across the table, flanked by Admiral Chen and Strategic Director Kaplan. "You lied to us," Valkyr accused immediately. "You concealed your true military capabilities." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "We protected ourselves. There's a difference. Your colonies, your civilian ships, they were a deception." "No," Rodriguez countered. "They were genuine. We are colonizers and explorers by nature. But we're not fools. When we detected your civilization's transmissions decades ago, we realized we weren't alone in the universe. We hoped for peaceful contact, but prepared for the alternative. By building weapons of war, Valkyr said bitterly. Admiral Chen leaned forward. By ensuring our survival. Your first communication wasn't an invitation to dialogue. It was a demand for submission. Strategic Director Kaplan activated a holographic display showing transcripts of the Confederation's initial diplomatic package. You demanded we limit our expansion, surrender resources, and submit to your governance. You never once suggested we might be equals. Valkyr's facial ridges flushed with the Confederation equivalent of indignation. The Confederation has brought order and stability to this sector for thousands of years. At what cost? Rodriguez asked quietly. How many species have lost their independence, their cultural identity, their right to determine their own future? Lesser species require guidance, Valkyr insisted. Without the Confederation's leadership, this sector would descend into chaos and warfare. Or perhaps it would find a different kind of order, Rodriguez suggested, one based on mutual respect rather than dominance. The negotiations continued for days. As they progressed, more details of the human deception emerged. For over 2 decades, humanity had maintained a dual-track development program. The civilian program expanded outward, establishing colonies and resource operations with minimal defensive capabilities. The face they showed to the galaxy. Meanwhile, the military program developed in secret within the Sol system, hidden from long-range sensors by massive stealth fields projected from Jupiter's moons. The dreadnoughts represented the culmination of human military technology, designed specifically to counter the capabilities human scientists had extrapolated from intercepted Confederation transmissions. You never expected peaceful contact, Valkyr accused during one particularly heated exchange. We hoped for it, Rodriguez corrected. But hope isn't a strategy. We prepared for reality, not our dreams. And reality proved us right. As negotiations continued, the remaining Confederation forces regrouped at their core worlds, preparing for what they assumed would be a human invasion. Instead, they received a transmission containing footage of the negotiations and a proposal. The human terms were surprising, not demands for surrender or reparations, but an invitation to form a new interstellar council where the Confederation would be an equal member alongside humanity and any other willing species. We don't want your territory, Rodriguez explained to a stunned Valkyr. We don't want to replace the Confederation with a human empire. We want something better than either of us could build alone. The Confederation High Council will never agree, Valkyr warned. They've ruled for too long to share power now. Rodriguez smiled grimly. Then perhaps it's time for the species under Confederation rule to decide their own future. We've transmitted our proposal to every world in Confederation space, along with evidence of how decisively we defeated your fleet. The implications weren't lost on Valkyr. For millennia, the Confederation had maintained control through the perception of technological supremacy. That perception had been shattered. You would cause chaos throughout the sector, he protested. Centuries of stability undone. Sometimes, Strategic Director Kaplan interjected, systems need to be destabilized before they can evolve into something better. 6 months later, representatives from 27 spacefaring species gathered on a neutral station constructed at the midpoint between Earth and the former Confederation capital world. The Galactic Council, as it came to be known, established new principles for interstellar relations, mutual defense, technological exchange, cultural autonomy, and collaborative expansion. Surprisingly, Valkyr attended as the Confederation representative. The High Council had been dissolved in a relatively peaceful internal revolution, once member species realized the true military balance of power. I still don't understand, Valkyr admitted to Rodriguez before the opening ceremony. You had us at your mercy. You could have demanded anything. Rodriguez looked out at the assembled representatives, a diversity of forms and philosophies united in common purpose. What we demanded was the one thing the Confederation never offered its subjects, the right to choose their own path. And if we had chosen to continue fighting? Valkyr asked. Rodriguez's expression hardened. Then you would have learned why we named our ships Retribution, Defiance, Sovereignty, Vindication, Judgment, and Reckoning. We prepared for peace, Supreme Commander, but we built for war. As the new Galactic Council convened its first session, news arrived from distant sensor outposts of unusual activity beyond the known territories, signs of another advanced civilization approaching from the galactic rim. Rodriguez and Valxer exchanged glances, both recognizing that the true test of their new alliance might be yet to come. Perhaps, Valxer suggested with newfound humility, we have more to learn from each other than either of us realized. Rodriguez nodded. That, Supreme Commander, is the one principle both our species can agree on. In the shipyards orbiting Earth, a new class of vessel was already under construction, larger than the dreadnoughts but designed for exploration rather than warfare. Its name was emblazoned across the partially completed hull, UES Cooperation. The galaxy, it seemed, still had many lessons to teach,